The friend who spoke too late. What Yu Menglong confided the night before he left. The night before Yu Menglong was gone, the city was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The streets that once echoed with his songs, his laughter, his rehearsals, seemed to fall into a silence that only fate could have written. Somewhere behind the tinted windows of his apartment, the light of his last night still flickered, a soft, dying glow that no one knew was marking the end. It was around 11:47 p.m. when his closest friend, Li Wen, received the call. "Are you awake?" Yu's voice was soft, almost weightless. Li was used to these late-night talks. Yu often called when sleep refused to come, but this one was different. His voice carried something unfamiliar, an emptiness that was both calm and cold. Li remembered asking if everything was fine, and Yu chuckled, that same disarming laugh that had charmed millions on screen. "I'm fine," he said. "I just wanted to hear a familiar voice." That sentence, simple as it sounded, now replayed in Li's head every day like a broken record. For over an hour, they talked about everything and nothing. About work, about music, about how fame had become a room with no doors. Yu said he felt like a product that couldn't be returned, something that everyone wanted a piece of but no one really cared for. Li tried to cheer him up, teasing him about his upcoming film, about his fans who waited hours outside in the rain just to catch a glimpse. But Yu only sighed. "I used to think love was loud," he murmured. "Now I think real love is quiet. It doesn't ask, it just stays. But I don't think anyone stays anymore." That silence after the line was heavy. Li wanted to respond, to comfort him, but before he could, Yu changed the topic. He spoke about the stars outside his window, how they looked dull tonight, how the city lights always outshone them. "Maybe that's why stars fall," he said quietly. "They get tired of competing." Li laughed, thinking it was another of Yu's poetic metaphors. But it wasn't. No one knew that these were the last words of a man who had spent years trying to hold himself together while the world demanded more from him than he could give. Behind the stage lights and camera flashes, Yu Menglong was unraveling. Those closest to him had noticed small changes. The way he stared into space during interviews, the pauses between his answers, the rare smiles that seemed rehearsed. His team said he was just tired. The industry said it was creative burnout. But Li knew it was more. That night, Yu admitted something he'd never said before. "Do you ever feel like you're talking, but no one's really listening?" he asked. Li replied, "All the time. But that's life. People listen to answer, not to understand." Yu chuckled again, but this time it broke halfway. "Exactly. I've been screaming for years," he said. "But I think they only hear the melody." Li remembered going quiet after that. There was nothing to say, not really. What could anyone say to a man who felt unseen while standing under the brightest lights? When they hung up, Yu said, "Thank you for listening tonight." Li didn't think much of it. He said, "Always, brother." But what he didn't realize was that this wasn't gratitude, it was goodbye. The next morning, Li woke up to hundreds of missed calls, the kind that make your stomach drop before you even answer. He thought maybe it was an accident, maybe you had fainted again from exhaustion, maybe it was something minor. But when he saw the news, the words didn't make sense. They felt unreal. Actor and singer Yu Menglong has passed away. Passed away. Such a gentle phrase for such a violent heartbreak. Li said the world slowed down in that moment. His phone slipped from his hand. He couldn't breathe. The same voice that had called him less than 12 hours before was now gone forever. He replayed the conversation over and over, trying to find the clue he missed, the hidden goodbye. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe it was the pause. Maybe it was the way you said, "Thank you for listening." Everything became a clue. In the days that followed, fans flooded social media with grief. Videos of his laughter, his performances, his interviews filled the internet. People quoted his lyrics, the ones that now read like coded cries for help. "I'm smiling, but it hurts to stay," one song said. No one had noticed before. Li stayed silent for a long time. He didn't post tributes, didn't attend interviews, didn't join the memorial specials that replayed Yu's life in glossy montages. He couldn't, because, while the world celebrated Yu's light, Lee could only see the darkness that had swallowed him. He remembered how you once said, "Fame is a beautiful cage. People clap while you suffocate." At the time it sounded poetic, like something only a deep artist would say. Now it sounded like a confession. Behind the applause there was loneliness. Behind the laughter there was silence. In his final months, Yu's schedule had been relentless. Filming, photo shoots, endorsement deals, it never stopped. He was smiling on camera, but disappearing off it. His messages to friends became shorter, his responses slower. When people asked how he was, he said, "I'm fine," with a smile emoji. But Lee said that smile was never real. It was a mask that even he had stopped taking off in private. There's a kind of sadness that doesn't look sad. It laughs at jokes it performs. You carried that sadness like a professional, until the weight became unbearable. When Lee finally spoke publicly months later, his voice trembled. "He tried to tell me," he said. "He told me he was tired, but I thought he just needed rest. I thought he'd be okay. I didn't think tired meant I want to stop existing." That's what haunts him the most. The things left unsaid. The words he could have spoken back. The night he could have stayed longer on the call. "I wish I'd told him I was coming over," Lee said. "I wish I hadn't let him hang up." Those who were close to you said he had always been gentle, almost too gentle for the world he lived in. He hated conflict, avoided confrontation, and apologized even when it wasn't his fault. He loved to make others feel seen, even when he was fading. "He used to text me random songs at 2 a.m., one friend shared. On that last night, he sent me a song too. I didn't listen to it until after. The lyrics said, 'When I'm gone, don't cry for me. Just remember the silence between my songs.' It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a message. Everything he did that night was a farewell disguised as routine, a final act of grace from a man who didn't want to burden anyone with his pain. In his apartment, they found a half-finished letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. The handwriting was shaky but neat. It read, "I hope the world forgives me for being tired. I tried to stay. I really did. Please don't hate me for wanting peace." Lee said he kept a copy of that letter. He reads it every time he feels guilty. Because he knows now that you didn't want to die. He just wanted the noise to stop. That's the thing about despair. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it calls you at midnight and says, "Are you awake?" And sometimes, if you're not listening closely enough, you won't realize it's saying goodbye. Now, years later, Lee still visits the same rooftop they used to sit on after long shoots. He says he talks to you there. I tell him I'm sorry. I tell him I hurt him now. The night before Menglong's death has become a haunting memory frozen in time, one that his closest friend, Lee Win, still replays in fragments, hoping to change an ending that came too soon. He remembers the dim sound of Yu's voice, the way it trembled yet tried to sound strong, and how the city outside his window seemed too still, as if it too was holding its breath. After you hung up that night, Lee thought about calling back. Something in Yu's tone had felt final, but Lee convinced himself it was nothing. After all, you had always been introspective, poetic even when he was sad. He's probably just tired, Lee told himself. But deep down, a cold unease had already settled. The truth was, Yu had been fading long before that night. The industry had drained him. His schedule a relentless cycle of lights, cameras, and expectations. He was adored by millions. But the loneliness that fame brought was unbearable. Behind the scenes, he was a man who barely recognized himself in the mirror. The reflection, staring back, was not the boy who once dreamed of music and art. It was a stranger trapped behind a painted smile. During his last few weeks, Lee noticed how you avoided eye contact. He showed up to rehearsals with his trademark grin, but spoke little. He seemed lighter somehow, as though he was letting go of something invisible. People around him mistook it for calmness. They didn't realize it was surrender. He looked peaceful, Lee recalled later, his voice cracking. But now I know it wasn't peace. It was exhaustion. That night, you had confessed things he'd never dared say before. You know what hurts the most? He asked softly. Being surrounded by people who cheer for you, but no one really sees you. They see the character, not the man. Lee tried to joke it off, saying, That's fame, brother. You asked for it. You chuckled faintly. I know. I just didn't know I'd lose myself in the process. Those words would haunt Lee forever. Hours after that conversation, you sat by his window, watching the city lights blur through the rain. His guitar rested on his lap. There was an unfinished melody in his notebook, the last song he ever wrote. Its title read, The Sky Forgot My Name. The lyrics were fragmented, almost unreadable in places, but one line stood out. When the lights go out, I hope someone remembers the sound of my silence. That was Yu's poetry, raw, tragic, and prophetic. The next morning, the world woke up to the shocking news. Messages poured in, disbelief spreading like wildfire across social media. Fans posted his photos, videos, and performances with captions like, You were our light. But for Lee, the words were too painful to read. He knew the truth, that while the world celebrated Yu's brilliance, he had been dying inside, quietly unseen. Reporters began calling. They wanted to know if Lee had noticed any signs. Everyone wanted a story, but what they didn't understand was that Yu's pain was not the kind that screamed. It was quiet, hidden beneath charm and professionalism. He smiled even when his eyes told a different story. In private, Yu often talked about his struggles with sleep. He said the nights were the hardest because silence left too much room for thought. That's when the applause stops, he once said, and all that's left is me. He would scroll through messages from fans, thousands of them, and still feel alone. They love me, he told Lee, but not me. They love what I show them. In the entertainment world, vulnerability was often seen as weakness. So you learn to hide it, to package pain into art and trauma into beauty. But even beauty has its breaking point. On his final day, you went through his usual routine, met his manager, attended a brief interview, and even texted Lee a meme with a laughing emoji. It was his way of pretending everything was fine. But beneath the laughter, something had already decided. When Lee was finally called to identify him, he said it didn't feel real. He looked like he was just sleeping, he whispered, like he'd wake up any second and make some joke. The room was filled with flowers from fans with letters that said, You saved me with your music. The irony was cruel. The man who saved millions couldn't save himself. Weeks later, Lee returned to Yu's apartment. It was exactly as he left it, tidy, quiet, and hauntingly still. The coffee mug from that last night's conversation was still on the table. The phone charger still plugged in. Everything frozen, as if waiting for him to come back. Lee found Yu's journal on his desk. Between pages of lyrics and random notes, there were small, heartbreaking entries. One read, Sometimes I wish I could just be a person again, not an image, not a headline, not a product. Another said, I smile because they need me to. I perform because I have to. But when do I get to just exist? Reading those words broke Lee in ways he couldn't explain. He realized that you had been saying goodbye for a long time, just not in words people could understand. Every tired smile, every postponed call, every I'm fine was a piece of a puzzle no one put together until it was too late. After his funeral, Lee stayed behind when everyone left. The sky was overcast, the wind brushing softly through the rows of flowers. He placed a single photo on the grave, a picture of them laughing, taken years before fame swallowed their lives. You were right, Lee whispered. Real love stays, and I'm still here. As months turned into years, Yu Menglong became more than a memory. He became a symbol, a reminder of the silent battles celebrities fight while the world watches, unaware. His death forced fans and media to confront a painful truth. Fame doesn't heal. It often hides the wounds deeper. Lee now speaks openly about mental health in the industry. He says it's his way of keeping Yu's voice alive. He didn't die because he was weak, Lee told an interviewer. He died because he carried more than anyone could bear, and no one noticed how heavy it had become. He still visits Yu's apartment once a year. The view from the window hasn't changed, the same skyline, the same city lights. Sometimes he brings his guitar and plays the unfinished song Yu wrote that last night. He never changes the lyrics. He lets them stay broken, incomplete, just like the story of his friend. And every time he strums that final chord, Lee swears he can feel a faint presence beside him, a whisper in the dark saying, "Thank you for listening." He always answers, his voice trembling through the quiet, "I hear you now." Because even though Yu Menglong is gone, his silence still speaks louder than the applause ever did. And for Lee, the friend who spoke too late, that silence will echo for the rest of his life. A reminder that sometimes the most important words are the ones we never get the chance to say.